Bryce Wellington was having fun bullying the poorest girl in school, but if he had known who her mother was, he never would have been so bold. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Riverside Preparatory Academy, one of the most prestigious private schools in the state. Students in designer uniforms clustered in their usual groups, the wealthy kids with their luxury cars and endless allowances, and the few scholarship students who tried to blend in but never quite succeeded. Madison Thompson walked through the main gate carrying a worn backpack that had seen better days. At 16, she was quiet and studious, the kind of girl who spent lunch periods in the library rather than socializing with classmates who could afford things she could only dream of. Her uniform was clean and pressed, but observant eyes could tell it was second-hand, the slight fading at the edges, the careful mending where a seam had been repaired. Madison was at Riverside on a full academic scholarship, something she'd earned through countless hours of study and her mother's encouragement. Her mother worked multiple jobs to support them, and Madison was determined not to waste the opportunity she'd been given. But opportunities came with a price, and at Riverside Prep, that price often meant dealing with students like Bryce Wellington. Bryce was everything Madison wasn't: wealthy, popular, and completely convinced of his own superiority. At 17, he drove a BMW that cost more than most people made in a year, wore a Rolex his father had given him for his birthday, and never let anyone forget that his family donated enough money to the school to have a building named after them. As Madison walked toward her first class, she heard the familiar sound of expensive shoes clicking on marble floors behind her. "Well, well," Bryce's voice carried across the hallway, loud enough for other students to hear. "If it isn't our charity case." Madison kept walking, her shoulders tensing slightly. She'd learned that ignoring Bryce was usually the best strategy, though it didn't always work. "Hey, scholarship girl," Bryce called out, his voice dripping with mock friendliness. "I'm talking to you." Madison stopped and turned around slowly. Bryce stood there with his usual smirk, surrounded by his friends, other wealthy students who fed off his cruelty like parasites. "What do you want, Bryce?" Madison asked quietly. "Just wondering how you can afford to come to school here when your mom probably cleans toilets for a living," Bryce said, earning snickers from his followers. Madison's cheeks flushed, but she kept her voice steady. "My grades got me here. Maybe you should try studying sometime instead of buying your way through everything." The smirk faltered on Bryce's face. He didn't like being challenged, especially in front of his friends. "Careful, Thompson," he said, stepping closer. "You might be smart, but you don't belong here. Everyone knows it. You're just playing dress-up in a world you'll never actually be part of." Before Madison could respond, the first bell rang, and students began moving toward their classrooms. Bryce shot her one last mocking smile before walking away, his friends trailing behind him like loyal dogs. Madison stood there for a moment, fighting back the tears that threatened to form. She'd dealt with Bryce's bullying for 2 years now, but it never got easier. The worst part was that some of what he said hit close to home. She often did feel like she was playing dress-up, pretending to belong in a world where everyone else seemed to have so much more than she did. What Bryce didn't know, what none of the students knew, was that Madison's mother wasn't cleaning toilets or working in a factory. Dr. Patricia Thompson was actually the school's principal, a position she'd held for 3 years. But she'd made a conscious decision to keep her relationship with Madison private, wanting her daughter to succeed or fail on her own merits rather than receiving special treatment as the principal's child. Patricia watched the interaction between Bryce and Madison from her office window, her jaw clenching with controlled anger. She'd seen enough of Bryce Wellington's behavior over the years to know exactly what kind of person he was: entitled, cruel, and completely lacking in empathy. But as much as it pained her to watch her daughter suffer, Patricia knew that intervening would only make things worse for Madison in the long run. Still, there were limits to what any mother could tolerate. Over the next few days, Bryce's harassment of Madison escalated. He started small, accidentally bumping into her in the hallways, making loud comments about scholarship students when she was within earshot, encouraging his friends to exclude her from group projects. But Bryce wasn't satisfied with subtle cruelty. He wanted to make a statement. On Thursday afternoon, Madison sat alone in the cafeteria, eating a packed lunch she'd made at home while other students enjoyed catered meals from the school's expensive dining service. She was reading a book, trying to ignore the conversations around her about weekend plans she couldn't afford and vacations she'd never take. That's when Bryce made his move. He walked over to Madison's table, carrying a bottle of expensive, sparkling water, the kind the cafeteria sold for $8, which was more than Madison's entire lunch budget. "Hey, everyone," Bryce announced loudly, his voice carrying across the cafeteria. "I want to share something with you all." Madison looked up from her book, sensing trouble. Other students turned to watch, drawn by the spectacle Bryce was creating. "I think we should all take a moment to appreciate how hard Madison Thompson works to be here," Bryce continued, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "I mean, it must be so difficult to fit in when you can't afford the same things as everyone else." Madison started to stand up, but Bryce wasn't finished. "In fact," he said, unscrewing the cap on his sparkling water, "I think Madison deserves a special drink to go with her sad little sandwich." Before Madison could react, Bryce dumped the entire bottle of sparkling water over her head. The liquid soaked through her hair and uniform, dripping onto her book and the few belongings she'd had on the table. The cafeteria erupted in gasps and laughter. Some students pulled out their phones to record the humiliation, while others just stared in shock. Madison sat there frozen, water dripping from her hair, her face burning with embarrassment and rage. "Oops," Bryce said with mock concern. "Sorry about that. Maybe next time you can afford to buy your own drinks." Madison stood up slowly, water still dripping from her clothes. For a moment she looked like she might cry or run from the room. Instead, she picked up her soggy sandwich and threw it directly at Bryce's chest, leaving a smear of peanut butter and jelly on his expensive uniform. "You're a pathetic bully," Madison said, her voice shaking with emotion, "and everyone here knows it." Bryce's face turned red with anger and embarrassment. Being humiliated in front of the entire school wasn't part of his plan. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," he snarled, stepping toward Madison threateningly. That's when a voice cut through the cafeteria noise like a blade. "Mr. Wellington." Everyone turned to see Dr. Patricia Thompson standing in the cafeteria doorway. The principal rarely made appearances in the student dining area, and her presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. "My office, now," Patricia said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that made even the most rebellious students snap to attention. Bryce looked confused and annoyed. "Dr. Thompson, this isn't what it looks like. Madison attacked me. I saw exactly what happened," Patricia interrupted, her eyes never leaving Bryce's face. "I've been watching you for quite some time, actually." Madison looked between her mother and Bryce, her heart pounding. She could see the recognition dawning in some students' faces as they began to piece together the resemblance between Madison and the principal. Patricia walked over to Madison, her expression softening slightly. "Are you hurt?" she asked. Madison shook her head, still too stunned to speak. "Good," Patricia said, then turned back to Bryce. "You have exactly 30 seconds to get to my office, or you'll be explaining your behavior to your parents and the school board." Bryce opened his mouth to argue, but something in Patricia's expression made him think better of it. He stalked out of the cafeteria, his friends trailing behind him uncertainly. Patricia turned to address the other students. "Anyone who recorded what just happened will delete those videos immediately, or they'll be joining Mr. Wellington in my office to discuss cyberbullying policy." Phones disappeared quickly as students scrambled to comply. "Madison," Patricia said quietly, "please come with me." As they walked toward the administrative offices, Madison could hear the whispers starting behind them. By the end of the day, everyone would know that Madison Thompson was Dr. Thompson's daughter. In Patricia's office, Madison sat in a chair across from her mother's desk, still damp and disheveled from Bryce's attack. Patricia closed the door and sat down, her professional demeanor softening as she looked at her daughter. "I'm sorry," Patricia said simply. Madison looked up, surprised. "You're sorry?" "I'm sorry that I let my principles get in the way of protecting you. I thought keeping our relationship private would help you succeed on your own terms, but I never intended for you to suffer like this." Madison was quiet for a moment, processing everything that had happened. "What's going to happen to Bryce?" "He's going to face the consequences of his actions," Patricia said firmly. "But first, I want to know why you never told me how bad the bullying had gotten." Madison shrugged. "I knew you were trying to treat me like any other student. I didn't want to make things weird." Patricia leaned forward, her expression serious. "Madison, you are not any other student to me. You're my daughter, and while I believe in letting you fight your own battles, I will never stand by and watch someone abuse you." There was a knock at the door, and Patricia's secretary entered. Dr. Thompson, Mr. and Mrs. Wellington are here to see you. Patricia nodded. Send them in, please. Bryce's parents entered the office. Richard Wellington, a man in an expensive suit who carried himself with the kind of arrogance that money often brought, and his wife Catherine, who looked like she'd stepped out of a country club magazine. Patricia, Richard said with false familiarity, I'm sure we can sort out this little misunderstanding. Boys will be boys, after all. There's no misunderstanding, Patricia replied coldly. Your son publicly humiliated another student and then threatened her when she defended herself. Catherine Wellington glanced at Madison with barely concealed disdain. I'm sure if this girl hadn't provoked Bryce. This girl, Patricia interrupted, standing up slowly, is my daughter. The room went silent. Richard Wellington's face went pale, while his wife's mouth fell open in shock. Your daughter? Richard stammered. My daughter, Patricia confirmed. Madison Thompson. The student your son has been systematically bullying for 2 years. Richard looked between Patricia and Madison, his mind clearly racing as he tried to calculate the political implications of his son's behavior. Well, he said, forcing a smile, this changes things, doesn't it? I'm sure Bryce didn't know. It doesn't change anything, Patricia said firmly. Whether Madison is my daughter or not, your son's behavior is unacceptable. He assaulted another student in front of the entire school. Assaulted? Catherine scoffed. He spilled some water on her. It's hardly assault. Patricia walked to her computer and turned the screen toward the Wellingtons. On it was security footage from the cafeteria, showing Bryce deliberately pouring water over Madison's head. This is assault, Patricia said calmly. It's also harassment, intimidation, and creating a hostile educational environment, all of which are grounds for immediate expulsion. Richard's composure cracked. Now wait just a minute. The Wellington family has been a major supporter of this school for generations. We've donated millions. And I appreciate the family's past generosity, Patricia replied. But donations don't buy immunity from consequences. There was another knock at the door. This time, it was Bryce himself, looking significantly less cocky than he had an hour earlier. Sit down, Patricia told him. Bryce glanced at his parents, then slumped into a chair. For the first time since Madison had known him, he looked genuinely worried. Bryce, Patricia began, you have terrorized my daughter for 2 years. You've made her feel unwelcome and unwanted in an environment where she has every right to succeed. Today, you crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. I didn't know she was your daughter, Bryce mumbled. And why should that matter? Patricia asked. Would it have been acceptable to humiliate her if she were someone else's child? Bryce didn't answer. Let me be very clear, Patricia continued. You are being suspended immediately, pending a full investigation into your conduct. Depending on the findings, you may face expulsion. Richard jumped to his feet. This is ridiculous. You can't expel him over a childish prank. I can and I will, Patricia said. Unless, she paused, letting the word hang in the air. Unless what? Catherine asked quickly. Patricia looked directly at Bryce. Unless you're willing to take responsibility for your actions and make genuine amends. What kind of amends? Bryce asked warily. First, you'll write a formal apology to Madison and deliver it in front of the entire school at tomorrow's assembly. Second, you'll serve a month of detention, during which you'll work with our maintenance staff to understand what real work looks like. Third, you'll complete 100 hours of community service at a local shelter or food bank. Patricia paused, then continued. And fourth, you'll attend counseling sessions to address your bullying behavior. If you complete all of these requirements and demonstrate genuine change, you can return to school on probation. Bryce looked at his parents, clearly hoping they would object to the harsh terms. Instead, Richard nodded quickly. Of course, Richard said. Bryce will do whatever is necessary to make this right. I'm not finished, Patricia said. If Bryce ever harasses, intimidates, or bullies another student again, any student, he will be permanently expelled, regardless of his family's connection to this school. The room was quiet except for the sound of Bryce's labored breathing. Finally, he looked up at Madison. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I really am sorry. Madison studied his face, looking for signs of sincerity. She saw fear, certainly, and embarrassment, but there was something else there too, maybe the beginning of actual remorse. Apology noted, Madison said simply, but actions matter more than words. 6 weeks later, Madison walked through the same courtyard where Bryce had first humiliated her. The dynamics at school had shifted dramatically since the cafeteria incident. Students who had once ignored her now made an effort to include her in conversations. Teachers who had treated her as just another scholarship student now recognized her as Dr. Thompson's daughter, though Patricia had made it clear that Madison would receive no special treatment academically. The biggest change, however, was in Bryce Wellington himself. True to his word, he had completed all of Patricia's requirements. His public apology had been genuinely remorseful, delivered without the smirk or sarcasm that usually characterized his speech. His community service at a local homeless shelter had opened his eyes to real hardship, in a way his privileged upbringing never had. And the counseling sessions had helped him understand how his own insecurities and pressure from his family had contributed to his bullying behavior. Madison found Bryce sitting alone at lunch, reading a book, something she never would have expected to see before their confrontation. He looked up as she approached. "Mind if I sit?" Madison asked. Bryce looked surprised, but nodded. "Sure." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Bryce spoke. "I wanted to thank you," he said. Madison raised an eyebrow. "Thank me? For not letting me get away with it, for standing up to me even when it was hard." Bryce set down his book. "I was becoming someone I didn't like, and I didn't even realize it." "We all make mistakes," Madison said. "What matters is what we do after we make them." Bryce nodded. "I'm trying to do better. It's harder than I thought it would be." "Good things usually are," Madison replied. As they continued talking, neither of them noticed Dr. Patricia Thompson watching from her office window, a small smile on her face. Her decision to keep her relationship with Madison private had been tested, but in the end, it had led to something better than she could have hoped for. Not just justice, but genuine growth and understanding. Patricia turned back to her desk, where a letter from the school board awaited her attention. It was a commendation for her handling of the bullying incident, praising her for maintaining professional standards while protecting student welfare. She filed the letter away without reading it completely. The real reward wasn't official recognition. It was watching her daughter walk through the halls with confidence, knowing that she belonged there, not because of who her mother was, but because of who she was becoming. And sometimes, that was the greatest victory of all. Madison Thompson had learned that standing up for yourself sometimes meant accepting help from unexpected places. Bryce Wellington had learned that true strength came from lifting others up, not tearing them down. And Dr. Patricia Thompson had learned that being a good mother sometimes meant stepping out of the shadows to protect what mattered most. In the end, they all discovered that the most important lessons weren't found in textbooks. They were found in the courage to do what was right, even when it was difficult.